Well, hello everybody. I'm Gary from Lantana Removal, Queensland. 0449 986 880, and we eradicate lantana. I've been doing that for over 40 years with my son, works with me now. Now, basically, I wanted to bring you up to speed on where we are up to now. I've been contacting the state government and working through, as I said before, of trying to work out who did what and how did they come to this conclusion that they could just leave lantana alone. And what's come of that is that actually it's not true. It's completely outside of the law. I contacted the Department of Transport, the TMR, the other day, and I'd contacted them nearly 12 months ago, I think it was. It was a long time ago, and I'd had the same sort of discussion with them and said, well, you know what, from here to Caloundra, or from Caloundra to Maryborough, you know, it's a massive problem, and all the way up the rest of the coastline. But I just picked those two spots, and they said, well, you know, we use the councils to do the work for us. I said, yeah, but you know the councils don't do the work. They said, yeah, no, that's right, they don't. No. I said, well, how about you put me onto the legal department, you know, and I'll talk to those guys. And they said, well, hold on, let's get you somebody to talk to. Now, finally, after a couple of weeks, finally got to talk to the gentleman, and we had a bit of a chat. And I managed to explain to him that this is a very serious matter as far as the, you know, state of the country is concerned, and it affects so much of our population economically, with how 10 million hectares of this material is out there. Anyway, long story short, as we went through that, he went, yes, no, we admit the council won't do the work, and we admit that we know the council won't do the work, and we also admit that the council is acting illegally. Because I said to him, you know, there is no way that the council has a special clause outside of the Biosecurity Act that lets them decide to do nothing with this material. And that's where we need to roll this back to, okay? The only thing that will ever change this particular situation with lantana and the other weeds, okay, is public opinion. That's what my goal is here, is to help to bring the information to you guys. Then you guys can do your own research, and if you contact those people, okay, you'll be able to change these processes. You'll be able to make an active change in what happens, and then you also have the elections to make a further statement. But at the end of the day, when you see how the system is manipulated nowadays to give them the power to be able to do these things, there's a whole heap of not-for-profit organisations, and everybody out there in YouTube land think not-for-profit means that it's a good thing, and it means it's safe, and it means that the public's not paying for it, and it's got all these positives attached to it. And in actual fact, not-for-profit actually means none of those things, okay? You can still have huge money being paid to the person at the top of the tree in not-for-profits, and it's perfectly legal. There's nothing illegal about the whole system. So you can corruptly manufacture things very quickly with public opinion thinking this is a great thing. Now what happens is you got the government actually funding these not-for-profit organisations. Now I just had one the other day that I admire a lot, I'll tell you that now, and I quite think they are on the up and up in their heart and in their intentions. But I said to them, so you know, this is what I'm doing, this is the war I'm in, this is how I do it. They said, well, we're fantastically happy that you don't use poisons, and you know, we absolutely admire your work, but unfortunately we can't acknowledge you in any way because we're funded by the government. We get all our grants and our money comes through from the government, and we aren't going to bite that hand. These are the same groups of people that the government used when they did the symposium, whatever you want to call it, of putting all the people in the same room and polling those people who are supposed to represent me, they're supposed to represent you, they're supposed to represent the farmers, and they made the decisions. Now, they were a group of people like Ag Force and Landcare and oh geez, the bush rangers, no, the bush regenerators, councils, all of these particular people, and a series of not-for-profits. Okay, the worldwide wildlife fund, whatever they are, you know, who are notorious when I've seen some of their videos at misrepresenting things. So they got all these people together and they questioned all of these people about making these decisions about what benefits us. And within that, they then, just hold on a second. Yes, so they poll all of these people and they are supposed to represent us, and they're supposed to be experts from that field, and none of them are experts. Okay, I've just seen something very recently where farmers were all up in arms because these people were supposedly representing them. You know, those people have never been consulted. Nobody's ever consulted me about Lantana and about representing me and what they should do about Lantana. Now, if there's not something illegal about this whole system that they set up, this is what the state government did, then it's definitely immoral, and it should actually be asked of you guys, the general public. Why would you put together a team of not-for-profit organisations and then poll them as the experts and then claim that you took a good cross-section of the broad public and you made the decision to lower the classification of Lantana? Now, in lowering that classification, it didn't actually change the Biosecurity Act regulation that you must contain the material, you must cut buffers around the material and contain it and stop it from leaving the your property, the land that you manage, and then you must diminish the mass. Now, the fact of this is that within that situation of reducing that mass until it's taken care of, the councils have exactly the same law over them as what you have with that. Now, the court system works on a very simple principle that they acknowledge experts in their field. So the councils have gone to court numerous times, many different councils, and they have prosecuted individual citizens, individual landholders, land managers, if you want, citizens, ratepayers, and they've prosecuted them, and prosecuted them successfully, because the court has accepted these people as experts. But the whole time, the last 20 to 30 years, these experts have been doing exactly the same wrong thing, breaking the law within millions of hectares of our country. Now, the court system really does take a very serious, dim view of being misled, and they take it even worse from being misled by experts. Now, how are they going to take it of being misled by councils who are supposed experts in that field and supposed to be experts in the biosecurity management and have written their own biosecurity management plans? According to the state laws, they must have that on their web pages, okay, clearly displayed, and yet they have zero on Lantana. Yet you have Lantana infesting properties, as I've shown you in drone footage and shown you in the footage on Mount Me, all over the place on that job that we went out to have a look at the other day. And secondly, the job that we did on Mount Me, and the other ones that we've done all over the place that I have shown you, they all clearly show the council not doing any of those functions at all. Now, it doesn't matter, right, to the court. And this was posed to me by the DNRME, or however you say it, the Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy. That's exactly right. The council has no special get-out-of jail clause with this stuff. The council cannot lower the law in relation to whatever has been set by the state government. State government's overarching law is at that level. The councils cannot lower that level. They can't give themselves a we don't have to do this clause, and yet they have done and misrepresented themselves to the public while they've infested our waterways, our sides of our roads and our properties. And yet nobody to this date, that was 6 months ago, I took that information to Mr Turnbull, to Anastasia Palaszczuk, to the New South Wales Premier, to Mark Ferner, and we're still waiting for something to be done. So I've actually contacted the Queensland Attorney General's office to make an official complaint and to start the ball rolling and find out exactly how the heck this has come about. And we have to fix this. You can't have the court being misled that this is okay over here where the council's not doing their work, but we can prosecute Mr. and Mrs. Average because they have no money. And the Department of Natural Resources and Mines and Energy said that if you had, let's say as a private citizen, you had an extra large property, okay, let's say it was 300 acres, you had 100 acres of Lantana, it's too much for them to expect you to clean that whole mess up in one hit. Okay, so what they say is you must cut a perimeter around your property, you must maintain that perimeter, and you must diminish the mass in a reasonable and respectable time until the problem's all cleaned up. You may never allow that material to transgress off your property and infest other areas. Now, those roadsides have been like that for 20 years. Now, how is the council managing to do that? The state government has been made aware of this and nothing is happening. Okay? The state of the roads on the main road side of things is terrible. Okay? And it needs to be cleaned up before we start seeing litigation by private citizens where their properties are being infested. This material is travelled by water. One of the greatest movements of this material is being flushed downstream by water and seeding downstream. That's how the state government departments came up with the fact of saying, oh no, there's a massive seedbed there. Now, I've cleaned lands and cleaned areas and never had anything come up again, okay, because I work in steep terrain. And then the natural resources mob say to me, well, obviously then there's no seedbed there. And you go, yes, so where is the seedbed, do you reckon? Downstream? Yes, now you're getting it. Now this is 40 years of experience in the field. That's different to a scientist in a laboratory that only has this to hypothesize. I actually physically have been killing it for 40 years. So there's a big difference between my knowledge of the material and their knowledge. But when you take that back a bit and you wind it back a bit, there's a whole reason why it's never been widely publicized that this material is trafficked and traveled by water. Okay, and that is that then the liability starts to become a big problem for national parks and wildlife, for the state forests. Okay, they're not controlling any of this material. It is just flushing straight out of those ecosystems. And the system that they have in place now is to buy more land around the forests and the national parks to push back their boundaries so that at that point the material is within their boundaries. Okay, so they buy up their neighbours. Now, they don't have the money to be able to fund the management of their lands, but they have the money to expand the parks where the greenies go, oh, that's brilliant, hey, we're really green here. And it's actually a big play. It is not a serious situation. It's just trying to cover up their tracks. Now, one of the big flaws that I dislike most about the Lantana business with the national parks and the state forests and all of these things is that it's that far out of control. We have a mandate at a point in time where the government wants to throw us all out of the national parks and out of the state forests, okay? That's to cover up us being able to see exactly how bad these infestations are. Now, instead of them spending any money when they burn it all out and they kill all the animals and they do all this terrible, terrible damage and terrible damage to the ozone layer, which you'll see some of that footage put on my Facebook pages showing you to have a look at some of the processes where they actually have some figures for how bad that burning off is. But instead of them backing up the burning off and go, okay, we've done it once, now we're going to make sure this stuff doesn't get back in here and strategically wipe it out in the areas it needs to be kept out of, okay, they just let it all keep happening over and over again, and the forestry's getting weaker and the material's getting stronger. In 50 years they've been doing it, they've never been successful. What does that tell you about the system they're using? But the fires get more intense and the forestry gets weaker. It's self-explanatory of how bad that is to the system. It creates far more erosion. It creates far more runoff because all the time the soil's being left bare again, and it kills all the subsoil life. There's no good comes out of that system, but they say they don't have the money to manage their systems they have. Then why are we allowing them to buy more systems? Instead of people buying onto this absolute rubbish that goes on with these greeny flunkies, okay, that say, oh yeah, save everything, do this way, do this that way, and yet it's only farmers that kill animals, it's only farmers that cause degradation. Yet, as I said before, 10 million hectares is 100 million animals if there's only 10 animals per hectare, and there is a truckload more than that. Okay, that's 100 million animals. Between Blackberry and Lantana, we have 20 million hectares. That's 200 to 300 million animals, no matter how you look at it. Most of them would have died. Okay, they don't just relocate from those things. If they relocate from their original homes, they come into contact with us. We run them over, we shoot them, we do all sorts of things to them because they're in our way again. But that's okay, because they're in our way. Nobody cries about that. Nobody says, geez, actually, you got a point. That's a terrible number. How come we don't hear about that from the World Wildlife Fund? Because they get funding from the government to be part of this flunky group of people who go, yes sir, no worries, we'll vote for that, yeah, you beauty. Let's put in these stupid no clearing laws. Okay? It's not the no clearing that's the problem, it's the managing of the weeds. They are setting up a process where this is that far out of control, they can throw their hands up and go, geez, we don't know how we got to here, but unfortunately we can't do anything about it. But I can. I can work in 20 to 30 degrees where that material has to come out of. It has got to come out of there. It's got to come out of the watercourses. It cannot be allowed to flush out of those places. If the least we have to do, right, to the national parks and the state forests is cut a perimeter boundary around them, right? Clean out the first 200 meters of material on the border of those areas there, and that's it. It must be managed. I don't care what it costs them. Their actual thing by law is that they must stop that material from moving out of those things. If they can't afford to keep the national park, fine, sell it. That's what they would do to the private public, right? Finally, the national parks and wildlife must be held accountable. What is happening is criminal across our nation, and nobody cares about our children. Nobody's jumping up and down and going, are you seriously doing this? Are you setting all these things in process so you can actually misrepresent the people? You know, this is one of the critical things I've said all along, is that they say that that the general public doesn't care about things because they believe they can hoodwink us into anything else. But they make out, the councils, that there's huge areas of our state, right, of our country are written off. They're not going to do anything at all about the Lantana or other issues within those areas. Now, that's fine. Put that in writing and actually show us on the map which suburbs, which places, and where they are. And let me know how you go getting voted in again. You're allowing these people to have their cake and eat it too, and hide. You're allowing, not me, I'm out here doing this. You're allowing them to. Okay? You need to turn around to these people and say, actually, he's got a good point. You show me on the map whether my place is in that thing. And tell me how I bought my property, okay, and you didn't tell me that I was written off. Okay, so what? We're going to have second-class suburbs and second-class citizens, and we don't have the right to be protected against toxic plants, toxic animals, toxic whatever. See how this is actually so vilely wrong, right? That this goes way past all the animals. That's a separate issue, and that's bad enough on its own. Your children's financial future is being destroyed, and that's why I said to you, in 10 years, they have doubled the level of the Lantana infestation. In 10 years of their most intensive, they tell you, not me, their most intensive management of this material. Okay, they paid huge amounts of money for books to be written, huge amounts of rubbish that's just absolutely worthless. But in the next 10 years, with where that material is now being allowed to settle and sit, it's going to triple. So what is our future? There is no place that they have said, actually, that's a real problem. We're going to have to put in together a capital works program and get on top of this. See, it's the same thing as kicking you out of the state forests and national parks. Once you're out of those beautiful areas, those beautiful citizens areas that belong to the people, okay, what money are you going to spend on protecting those assets? None. Once you're out of there and you're completely locked away from not ever being able to utilize those things ever again, you're going to go, why would I spend any money on that? This is how the government thinks. They're like, oh yeah, this is a good idea, and you think of it yourself and you go, are you nuts? You cut the people out of that. The same thing happens here. You cut the people out of having the truth in front of them of exactly how deadly and dangerous these materials are, okay, and then you start to get to the point where people just don't bother to do anything. They go, well, my neighbour's not doing anything. See, you see the similarities? Those similarities exist there. You look at that. The actual Main Roads Department, TMR, say that because the councils, these guys are so bright, they're so clever little dirty so-and-sos, that they figured out they just wouldn't do anything, and they'd just tell the whole of the general public, we're not doing anything, why should we? We don't have to. And the general public got very upset. There's not many good things get said about the councils, but they literally have been breaking the law for 20 or 30 years and doing it through the court systems as well, while prosecuting the general public. And Main Roads went, yeah, well, they're getting away with it, how about we jump on with them? Until I put the acid on them and they realised I'm not a D person, they went, holy crap, you've actually figured this stuff out. Yeah, there's not a lot of safe places to hide with this subject. You're right, these people are acting outside the law. We actually don't want anything to do with them, but we're not ready right at this point to stick our hand in our pockets and actually meet our legal obligations, but we'll see how that goes in the future. I personally think the Transport Department's actually much more of a civilised, moral organisation than what the councils are in the way they conduct themselves. You know, to be able to prosecute people through courts and then actually be able to do what they've done to our ecology on our streets, on my streets around, you know, for, you know, as I said this morning, about 1,000 kilometres, you know. I could take 200 kilometres in straight away and show you, you know, but there'd be thousands of kilometres in our own local shire by the time you count both sides of the roads and the watercourses. So that's where we're at. This is the week's, you know, evolution. So what do you think? It's pretty staggering, isn't it? You know, fancy having the gall to set up or to include not-for-profit organisation. All you need is somebody as a figurehead of a not-for-profit organisation to give that its credibility, and then they, yes sir, no sir, you back with what you want to hear, and they're not going to go against what you say because you're rubber stamping their checks. I'm an independent player that works for a living, that's screwing myself by making so much noise, but we cannot allow this to continue. When we went for that drive the other day, there's hundreds of kilometres of just continuous Lantana. And as a professional, the difference with me is why I get so upset here in front of you and so angry about those things is because when I look at the material, I see the water it gets given, okay, because it's sitting right on a hard surface on the side of a road with huge amounts of runoff. Any rain happens, it gets a drink. It then flowers continuously when it's getting a drink. But when I look over the edges of those embankments and I see the steepness of the terrain, and you go, man, you are never going to get that stuff out of there. You know, you keep letting that roll down that mountainside, there is no stopping this material forever. And that's what you're looking at. And from my point of view, with my understanding of the material, it's desperation, because you're like, how are these people in our communities doing this stuff? The simple question is, when you get a person working for transport, you get a person for council on their own to the side, and you're talking to them, and you talk as a human being and with children and with family and with other people around us, they suddenly go, yeah, you're right, the council's acting completely illegally. I said to one of the council guys, you know, so where's the council exempt from this? And he went, oh. And you go, well, you know, you don't have to answer the question if you don't, you know, by your time you've got that happening between you, they go, yeah, you're right. No, they don't have any out clause. They're acting illegally. Don't quote me personally on it, but, you know, that's the way it is. Now, when you put that to the Attorney General's office, because those people aren't supposed to be able to pick and choose, if a complaint is made like that, it should be followed through, and it should be a situation that the councils across the nation are doing all of these things exactly the same. But councils are saying, well, the problem is too big. But the courts don't accept that the problem is too big for you. They say, well, you must be managing this level of eradication on that system. The councils have all written to me and said there's no works being carried out in this all the way through it. So then, for this to ever work, we're going to have some sort of system where there is a independent person. Hey, I'll do it. Independent person who goes around to the councils and goes, so what have you cleaned up this week? And that's what the state government should put in place. Hey, pay me, I'll go around and I'll make sure these guys actually clean that stuff up. You know, at the end of the day, until we have an independent person that can go around, measure these things and say, okay, you got to put a buffer around that. Actually, looking at the size and the area of it, there's no point in putting a buffer around it, just take the stuff out of there. But they want to cry poor and say to you, but there's no money, we don't have no money. These guys have been collecting the money for these things all along, but they have not been providing the services. If I was doing that as a private contractor with government money, okay, they'd have me in jail. They'd have me up against a wall in jail, and yet the councils have been doing this forever to you. It's your money. You've been paying it. They should not be able to say to you, oh, listen, we're going to have to put another $100,000 on your rates every year because we let this Lantana get to this stage. We let blackberry get to this stage. We let these weeds get to this stage. And there has to be somebody who asks the questions of Turnbull and Anastasia Palaszczuk and the New South Wales Premier and Mark Ferner. They have to be saying to these people, so you knew about this 6 months ago. Why didn't you make the phone calls or the inquiries? Because they think it'll go away. They think I'll stop doing this and explaining to you guys how this happened. This blew my mind when I found out about that business of the using the not-for-profit organisations. But you actually look at that and you look at how corrupt that system is, and to set that up and say, I saw some of the stuff they said about that we had 200 people come. Now, they don't say it's 200 individual people, and they were represented by this not-for-profit and that not-for-profit and this council and that council, and there were 10 real people and there were 11 other people, and it's broken down like that. But there's no way for us from the outside of being able to judge and go, okay, so the real people, who were they? Where did they come from? What sort of thing? They could have been their kids. They could have been anybody down the street. You look at everything else and you go, well, it's just as reasonable for me to make such a horrible statement like that as what it is to accept and say, well, they were probably doing the right thing somewhere there. They've cooked the books. And then they say to me, those people represent my interests. Not one of those people can kill and eradicate Lantana like me. So why would I have no respect for them? Why would I have respect for them? You know, all I hear is how they say it can't be eradicated. And the truth of the fact of that eradication, I have enough people from the private sector who, in just a small conversation, I can tell whether they've got the secrets or they haven't got the secrets, whether they've figured it out or they haven't figured it out. And so many of those people in the real world are genuine people, right? They could come work beside me any day of the week. They know what's going to take to get rid of that stuff, and it isn't as hard as these guys make out. They want to make out to you it's incredibly difficult so that they can justify why they never took it on and why they never succeeded. It's not that difficult to kill Lantana, it really is not. You don't need to heap buckets of poison on it the way people tell you to do. Poisons do not work. They debilitate the subsoil life and kill all the subsoil life. That is what you're going to build the next generation on. Why would you murder all of that life when you are going to need it to rebuild the ecosystem? If you don't rebuild the ecosystem, then the whole thing will collapse and that material will come back stronger. It's simple. It is not incredibly complicated to understand. You don't poison it. But the people who fund a lot of this stuff with the state government and these organisations are chemical companies. They have a reason to have the biggest section of that book is chemicals. And yet when you go through that, true farmers, true people who know the deal, turn around to you and go, there's only 6 of them worth having. There's 600. According to Mark Ferner, and I quote, his office said there's 600 poisons for this material. Real people say there's 6 of them that are any good. 600 to 6. Then you can only use poisons for 2 to 3 months of the year. Okay? The plant's got to be flowering actively. It's got to be all these things. Doesn't work. Then you got the other organisations that were the ones linked to these guys, not-for-profits, that have really got some suspect stuff going on, and there's the slash and paint policy. The mycorrhizal fungi and the subsoil life that the root system of that material is connected to, you just pumped all of that poison through that whole subsoil system. That's a factual thing. I asked Brisbane City Council to allow me to see where these works were going on, and my God, did the guy explode. No way in the wide world were they going to let me see that work being done. I've seen where the work's been done, and 6 to 12 months later, it's like a nuked forest. It is nuked. The trees, everything has had a major dose of poison all through that subsoil life system. And they tell you it's all good. That's what they want to tell you. You know, there is no getting past these things, that the misrepresentation of these facts for people like us is enormous. And the cost to our children's future is absolutely staggering. That's why I'm out here so much pumping this information out, trying to get it to people so they can make their judgments from those things and decide how to move this forward. We cannot lose this battle because the government, by its own admissions right here and now, have said to you nothing is being done. And the state government is okay. State and federal government both passed all of this over to the councils and said, well, the councils have got to do the work, the same as the main roads department, because the councils actually have tools and actually do physical work in the field. So it makes sense for office departments to farm that work out to those people. But those people never started that work. They immediately went, we don't do that work anyway. And the rest of the governments never checked up. No, actually, they knew that that was going on. Long before I brought it to their attention, they knew that nothing was being done. So all of these departments have had a material that grows at 20 to 30% in a bad year, and it grows at 100% in a good year when it has continual rains, or it lives on the side of a road where it's getting continual dampening, continues to flush and flourish and wash it downstream. See? So what was the plan? When they allowed the council to give up, what was the plan? What was ever going to happen? The national parks for the last forever have always said, we don't have any money to look after our parks, so we're not going to do anything. Everybody who lives along those borders of every single one of those national parks, state forests, you name it, is being infested illegally. They cannot allow that material legally to leave their boundaries of their state forests and national parks. But that's why you won't find the scientists and the experts telling you that water flushes that material and that's how it travels. They want to tell you it's little birdies and a couple of little leapy things and that's how it gets around. It doesn't. It gets flushed by water. That's the biggest movement in this material. And you've got, look, I've got acres and acres of footage that just graphically prove that's how that stuff gets flushed. When you're talking to the Department of Natural Resources and Mines and Energy, yes, the acronyms are pretty bad. They admit they know it gets travelled by water. They admit that, but it doesn't get admitted there. That's the problem with all this thing. There's so many lies being told that they talk themselves into believing their own lies. They believe that to be somewhere true. You look at the tobacco industry, you look at the sugar industry, you look at all these industries and the way that they can get scientists. If you pay for the funding, scientists, there's no morals in that group. They'll tell you whatever they want, even if it kills you, like the smoking. No problems, doesn't matter, you know. So that's where we're at. We've finally gotten to the bottom of this thing, and that's why I circulated that one about having your say, and why I really strongly advise everybody. I'll repost it again very shortly after this video to say, look, for goodness sake, stop these Muppets from getting their little cliquey group together, because they're not going to bring people in who are going to rock the boat. They're not going to ask me for my opinion. Have your say there, right? Don't forget, the farmers said that they brought in huge levels of documents into that thing for the clearing laws, and none of it was used by the state government. They just absolutely threw it out the door, and they actually stopped the people from talking. So here's where they say everybody has the right to be heard, and then they actually run a meeting like that where they stop the people who actually have evidence to say it goes against our land rights. It goes against every part of our the Land Act, and they list all of those laws that are relate to the Land Act, and it goes against those laws. You got to ask yourself, when they control the information to the people, they stop any possibility that you can actually get to the truth. And if you trust them enough, that's enough. But when you start to see exactly what's been done, and worse, how it's been done, it really does bring it to your attention that there is some very serious stuff being done to us as a group and to our children and our children's futures. When these property prices collapse because huge areas of the state have been written off, and that's actually where we're at with the laws as far as the government goes. The councils are screwing us over. We must have our lands as the lands for the animals to go onto, because all of the crown lands, which are our lands, are impenetrable to those animals. So that's why this whole land clearing laws and everything else came into place. They are out of control with actually being able to manage any of this forestry. The national parks is a complete disaster, illegally pouring out millions of tons of this material across our country illegally, and it's okay because they don't have any money. There's no, the law doesn't give you that that get out of jail card. So, you know, we need to turn around and start taking heed of these things and say, well, the animals and the flora and the fauna are very important. People will want to try and change the subject to say to you, well, hold on a minute, our Australian bushland is inhabited by thousands of things that shouldn't be there. Don't listen to all that dribble trying to wind you off the subject, right? Because there's so much stuff through these social media stuff that you can start to see some patterns of where people are trying to mislead off those subjects. Oh, why don't you poison that plant and then crawl underneath it and plant a tree in there? There's 10 million hectares. Have you got any idea what 10 million hectares looks like? And you want to crawl inside of every bush and plant a tree in there? The only thing that will work with this material is mechanized removal. There will be places that you have no alternative but to poison because you can't reach them anymore. They are that remote and that difficult. But the places that they are allowing it to be, first up are the places that must be cleared out. The watercourses, the high country. Once we get the high country cleaned out of the stuff we can do, then we'll be able to clear out the flats permanently. Okay, but there's no point in spending the money on those flats until that stuff that is infesting those flats is gone, because that's the seed bed that the scientists wanted to misrepresent you with, that there's a massive seed bed sitting underneath that material. It's not true. It's being flushed down from up there. That's why it's here. That's why it keeps coming up. When you clean that up there, there's no material comes up there. Okay, and then when you get down here and you clean that stuff out, there's no more comes up. Okay, but even if you get into positions where it is still being reinfested, you're still better off killing and cleaning out the material anyway. The rubbish and to stop droughts, we have to have a proper grass blanket on the bare ground. We have to get back to that. Councils all look at grass and go, it's an expense and it's got to be mowed, and we don't like it at all under any circumstances. And they mistreat grass in every other place other than a parkland. They absolutely mistreat it. So it's not actually doing a good job. It needs to be mowed at certain times of the year, so through winter it lasts through winter and then it flourishes again in summer. What they do is criminal, and it adds to all of that surface runoff, all of those soils choking up all of the plumbing and everything else downstream. This stuff is just common sense. The work that we would do in those things as we went through a surface of cleaning all of those things that need to be cleaned and rehabilitating the surface would mean that that surface would be stopping the erosion. It would be taking care of all those other weeds. Just by the management would take care of most of those weeds permanently. But the trouble is they leave the grasses and the rest of the stuff growing so wildly and out of control that the weeds take hold. Or one of my favourites with councils, the little trees, the little saplings all grow through that that footpath. Nobody can walk down that footpath anymore. It looks like crap. But worse than that, what it does is it lets them out of ever having to mow that. Lets them out of ever having to slash that. So where they could have gone along that footpath in, say, 10 minutes and covered a huge area, slashing it, right, can't do it anymore, and they won't do it anymore. Now you have a look at a lot of those areas. Then the trees up and overgrowing the road. Then we have to pay a huge fortune for tree loppers to come along and keep lopping the edge of those trees. The tree should have never been there in the first place. It should have been grassed, because that's the heaviest trafficked area for water down onto or off that road. Has to be grassed to stop all of that soil erosion. Simple basic things that when you're doing your job properly, you're actually saving money for the people rather than it costing more. It's costing more when you leave it to get to where it's overgrown or where it's out of control or where the weeds get into the system. The less we look after or manage or holistically improve a surface, the worse it deteriorates. It doesn't get better. The more we take animals off those areas completely, the worse the surfaces deteriorate. It really is a very important thing for us to start to deal with, because there's a lot of things we can change with council by demanding better processes, because we are really getting short shifted and we're paying a fortune for very bad operational practices, and that's a terrible thing. Anyway, look, I'm Gary. I'm from Lantana Removal, Queensland. We work out of Narangba. I thank you very much for taking the time to stop in. This month we're having a 10% special off the price of any jobs, and we were looking forward to hearing from you. So thank you very much. Bye bye.